Thank you. I'm also joined by my humanist colleague, Catherine Doyle. Hello, Catherine, as co-host, and Catherine will support monitoring questions on our chat, which will be looked at and read out during the questions and answers part of our talk, with our presentation that we'll have initially from Dr. Boylan, and we'll have questions and answers afterwards. We will be watching and reading the questions as they come in, but please aim to engage with us afterwards in the question and answer format of our evening, which Dr. Boylan will be happy to look at and engage on. The ability to ask a question will be done via audio access from myself and Catherine, and we would ask you to simply raise your hand as per the raise hand function on the Zoom talk this evening. We ask that you're respectful and mindful of our audience and the presentation shared kindly by Dr. Boylan. The talk and presentations and questions and answers will last until approximately 8:25, and then we'll have a final word from Dr. Boylan, and the talk will conclude hopefully by 8:30 p.m. And now, if you don't mind, a few small words on what is humanism. Humanism is a simple philosophy. It is an ethical life stance which focuses on human values, being good without God. It is about taking responsibility and treating others with respect while having our one life. If you'd like to know more or have more of an in-depth description, the statement of the fundamental principles of modern humanism, otherwise known as the Amsterdam Declaration, is available online, and you may also want to go to our website here in Ireland, www.humanism.ie. Our guest speaker this evening, Dr. Peter Boylan, is a retired Irish consultant obstetrician and former master of the National Maternity Hospital in Holles Street, and former chair of the Institute of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists. He was appointed by the Minister for Health to advise the HSE on the implementation of the Termination of Pregnancy Service in 2019. He was an expert witness at the inquest of Savita Halappanavar in 2013, and an expert witness for the family of Miss P in HSE versus PP in 2015. He is the author of In the Shadow of the Eight, My 40 Years Working for Women's Healthcare in Ireland, and with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the Irish Pregnancy Book, the 6th edition, O'Brien Press 2020. So, bear with me 1 second. So, hello, Peter.
Good evening, Michael.
How are you this evening? And thank you so much for joining. And you're welcome to the Humanism Association Ireland talk this evening. So we're delighted to have you here, and thank you so much for giving up some of your time. I believe you have a very interesting topic and presentation to present to us, and we're looking forward to hearing that. So if I may, over to you.
Thank you very much, and I hope you do find it interesting, and good evening to everybody. And also thank you very much for the invitation. Come to the next slide there, Uncle. And the next slide. Yeah, so I'm basically going to cover effectively healthcare, Catholic healthcare in Ireland, because really when you talk about religious healthcare, you're really talking about Catholic healthcare when it comes to the Irish situation. I'm going to discuss the ethical guidelines from the Catholic point of view and what they mean. I'll then cover the question of religious orders exiting direct involvement in the provision of healthcare, and also something about the global consolidation of healthcare facilities, hospitals and hospital groups around the globe, but particularly with reference to the United States. And then I'm going to finish up about the implications for Ireland, basically. Next slide. So when you take the voluntary hospitals in Ireland, which have a long tradition of providing healthcare from voluntary groups and many religious groups, and if you look at these 7 hospitals, which are large voluntary hospitals, and the amount of money that they get from the state, from your tax monies and my tax monies, you can see that it's the amounts that they get are huge. The Mater gets 355 million a year. These are figures from 2020. Vincent's 307, all the way down to St. John's Hospital in Limerick, which got 28.4 million. St. John's Hospital has 99 beds. And when you take the number of beds that these hospitals have, they account for 20% of public hospital beds in the Republic of Ireland. So 20% of acute hospital beds are owned by Catholic voluntary organizations with a religious ethos behind them. And in 2020, they got over $1 billion in revenue. And you can be sure that that figure is higher now with inflation and with COVID and so on. So they're getting a huge amount of money from the state. Next slide. On the private side then, 66% of private hospitals in Ireland have a Catholic ethos. Blackrock Clinic, Hermitage in Dublin, and the Galway Clinic are all now part of Blackrock Health, which is owned effectively by Larry Goodman. Then you've got the Bon Secours in Cork, Dublin, Galway, Limerick, and Tralee. They're the largest private hospital group in the country. You got the Mater Private. Now, the Mater Private was sold by the Mercy Sisters several years ago, but the condition was that it would maintain Catholic ethos, and that remains the case up to today. There is an analogy with the Mater Hospital in Belfast, which again was sold many years ago to the NHS. But the condition was that it would maintain Catholic ethos. So the Mater Private in Dublin and Cork, St. Francis Private in Mullingar, and of course St. Vincent's Private in Ellen Park. So 66% of private hospitals in the state are owned by Catholic orders and operate according to Catholic ethos. Next slide then. Next slide.
Yes, one moment, please, Peter. Thank you. Thank you.
So the ethical guidelines under which Catholic hospitals operate are set by the Irish Catholic Bishops' Code of Ethical Standards, the latest edition published in 2018. And among the many statements are that Catholic healthcare organizations may at times be asked to provide services not in keeping with the Church's moral teachings. No healthcare facility or practitioner should provide or refer a patient for an abortion, i.e. any procedure, treatment, or medication whose primary purpose or sole immediate effect is to terminate the life of a fetus or of an embryo before or after transplantation. So these are fairly specific directions, but in reference to the law, I'm going to read you out a statement from the Code of Ethical Standards published in 2018. You can buy it in Veritas Bookshop there in the center of town. And in relation to cooperation with others, this is on page 99 of the guidelines. They state, if a particular law conflicts with the fundamental and inalienable rights of the human person, however, it conflicts with the common good and with reason and does not command obedience. Now, what that statement means, in essence, is that canon law trumps state law. So if something is legal in the country but is against canon law, then it will not be performed or treatment will not be given in the hospital. There's an analogy with what happened in Melbourne, in Australia, in relation to, which is relevant in relation to the death of Savita Halappanavar. Bernadette White, who is the clinical director there, was asked directly what would happen in her hospital, Mercy Maternity Hospital in Melbourne, for a woman in the same circumstances. And what she said was that, well, we would transfer the patient out to another hospital for treatment. Now, clearly, that's not good medical practice to transfer somebody who's critically ill across the city, who may be dying from sepsis. So it's not just in Ireland where these things happen. The guidelines are also relevant to the provision of other healthcare services such as contraception, sterilization, IVF, access to clinical trials. I don't know if you remember, there was a hullabaloo in the Mater Hospital when they refused to give contraception to women undergoing a trial for cancer, a cancer treatment, because it was against their ethical code. And the reason for trying to prescribe the contraceptives to the women was that the medication they were getting would be dangerous to a developing embryo should they become pregnant. Now, the board, and in particular my father-in-law, in fact, Don Mahoney, deceased, he objected to this at the board, and eventually it was rejected. But it gives you an illustration of what the problems can be at board level and how board level decisions can interfere with clinical practice on the ground. That's a reference to something from the report on voluntary hospitals, chaired by Catherine Day and Deirdre Madden, which was published, I think, in 2019. Next slide, Michael. Thanks. So moving on now to St. Vincent's Healthcare Group, which of course is, I won't say close to my heart, but has been close to my brain for several years now. And if we look at the philosophy and ethical code, which we only got a hold of relatively recently, a few weeks ago, the Oireachtas Health Committee had asked for it on 3 occasions over several years and been refused. And it was only when it was went to the commissioner who makes decisions on freedom of information requests that they released it after the deal was done regarding the National Maternity Hospital. But the guidelines, the philosophy and ethical code is very clear and very relevant to the current situation. All those who choose to work in our healthcare facilities are made aware of and asked to comply with the core values as expressed in this mission statement and the ethical code. Now that phrase, core values, is important, and I'll come back to that, but remember that those 2 words, core values. In our healthcare service, healthcare is provided in the context of a Catholic ethos and interpreted in accordance with its teaching tradition. And they go on about direct abortion as you would anticipate. Next slide. Direct sterilization of either men or women is not permitted in our healthcare service when its sole immediate objective is to prevent or eliminate fertility. Now, they have stated in the past that they do perform sterilizations in the hospital. However, there was a statement from the chief nursing officer of the Eastern region that it is not done when the sole purpose is to prevent or eliminate fertility. And any GP who is foolish enough to refer a patient to St. Vincent's for a sterilization operation will get a letter back saying, we don't do that here. And if they're a woman, they refer them on into Holles Street. That's been the way for many years. Now, when they say that they do sterilizations, what they may mean is that they do operations which result in sterilization. And that could mean, for example, a hysterectomy. A hysterectomy done for any reason, forever, whatever, is a sterilizing operation. So that's the sort of sophistry that you're met with when you try and interrogate what their statements actually mean. And you have to phrase and parse everything that comes out of any of these religious owned hospitals. Then any action intended to cause or accelerate the death of any patient under any circumstances is considered to be morally wrong and contrary to the core principles and values of palliative care. Now, that has implications for the future. It's inevitable, I think, probably in coming years that assisted dying legislation will enter the realm of Irish legislation and Irish healthcare. It's already legal in some states in the United States, in Switzerland and in the Netherlands, and it's likely to be an issue here in the coming years. Gene editing in the future, which I'll come back to, is also another issue. Next slide, please. Now, I've referred to the legal position with regard to the bishop's guidelines, but what is the legal position in regard to the voluntary hospitals overall? And the Catherine Day report made reference to this, and in stating that on the one hand, the state has an obligation to organize its health and social care services to ensure access to lawful services by all its citizens, and health and social care organizations are obliged to comply with Irish law, irrespective of the religious affiliation. In other words, they have to obey the law. Now, that's no surprise, and they all do obey the law, so there's no kind of argument about that. However, on the other hand, Article 44(2)(5) of the Constitution protects the right of every religious denomination to manage its own affairs. And the interpretation of the extent of this autonomy in the healthcare context has not yet been determined by the Irish Supreme Court. So it's clear that if you like, the requirement for any of these voluntary hospitals, 20% in the country, any of these hospitals can decide themselves what treatments they're going to give, even if a treatment is legal in the state. But that autonomy has not yet been determined by the Irish Supreme Court, and it probably needs to be, as medical care gets more complicated, and as if you like, the requirements to provide treatments which may not fit in with Catholic ethos are introduced into standard medical care. Next slide, please. Now, if you move on to considering what happens when religious orders leave direct involvement in patient care, and this is happening all over the world as members of orders age, as well as falling vocations. And we're all aware of this in Ireland in particular, the number of vocations into the Catholic Church. Priesthood has fallen off a cliff. And we're aware, of course, of the aging structure of priests. Healthcare is becoming increasingly complex and expensive, and this is leading to consolidation. This is particularly evident in the United States, and I'll come to that a little bit later, where you have amalgamations and mergers and acquisitions of hospitals by Catholic healthcare organizations. So understandably, when the religious orders are leaving, they have to have succession plans. When Catholic religious orders leave, they have to follow canon law. So, and the same holds when they leave education. So they have to obey canon law strictures. Now, the solution all over the world has been to transfer their holdings, their shareholdings, to lay organizations which are entrusted to maintain the mission of the religious orders and to retain the core values. That's the core values, 2 words again, which I referred to earlier. And the vehicle of choice has been the public juridic person of pontifical right. Next slide, please. An example of this is the Sisters of Mercy at the Mater in Dublin. Their succession arrangement took roughly 15 years to be completed. And what they did was they created a holding company. And again, the concept of a holding company will become important a little bit later in the talk. So they established the Mater Misericordiae Children's University Hospital. That's the Mater and Temple Street Hospital together, basically. So that's a holding company that owns those 2 hospitals. And what the corporate structure is a public juridic person of pontifical right. Now, it's not a person, it's a corporate structure. And again, the language used by the Catholic Church can sometimes be hard to get your head around, but a public juridic person is not a person. It's a corporate structure. And these sponsorship arrangements are used to replace religious orders with lay organizations committed to maintain the original mission, as I said earlier. And the Sisters of Mercy, in a Buchanan-Ingersoll report of 2001 at the beginning of the process, said that in creating this new corporate structure of governance, it is the intention and hope of the Sisters of Mercy that Catholic voluntary public health care can exist, develop and flourish into the future, providing a parallel and alternative option to that of the state system, although they wish to be funded entirely by the state. So what they want to do basically is continue to be funded by the state, but provide a parallel and alternative option. In other words, one governed by Catholic ethical codes. Next slide, please, Michael. So recent examples in Ireland are the Mater, which I've just talked about, the Mercy in Cork in 2016, the Bon Secours, which is now owned by the Bon Secours Mercy Health Group from the United States. And they own hospitals in Ohio, Kentucky, New York, Maryland, Virginia, South Carolina, and Florida, as well as the Irish ones. They employ 60,000 people, and 450 Irish consultants work in their hospitals. And the net operating revenue of the group is approximately $10 billion a year. This is big business. And it's interesting that they have effectively taken over the Irish bonds. It's the same religious order, the Bon Secours. St. John of God did it in 2019. And St. Vincent's Holdings Company was created in 2022. Now, they have publicly denied that they are a public juridic person. They didn't say they're not a public juridic person of pontifical right. And again, I'll come back to that, but it could well be significant. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Holles Street St. Vincent's problem, because that's something that is really central to this whole debate. On September 15, 2016, Nicholas Cairns, former president of the High Court and at that time deputy chair, but effectively chair of the board of the National Maternity Hospital, and Dr. Rona Mahoney, who was then the master, wrote to Kieran Mulvey, who was mediating an agreement between Vincent's and Holles Street. And they wrote to Kieran Mulvey saying, we are willing to dissolve the charter of the National Maternity Hospital and agree that the ownership of the NMH will transfer to St. Vincent's Healthcare Group, a private company owned by the Sisters of Charity. the new NMH will be a 100% subsidiary of SVHG. Now, I think you need to look at that and absorb it. In 2016, the chairman of the board of the NMH and the then master, Dr. Mahoney, were happy to transfer ownership of the NMH to the Sisters of Charity. Now, how anybody thought that was a good idea, the Sisters of Charity have been one of the group who ran the Magdalene laundries, etc., etc. But they did. And that's the genesis of my row with the hospital that I devoted my virtually entire clinical career, professional career to, and obviously generated a lot of public controversy. But it's it's a staggering statement when you look at it, that they're happy to give this hospital to the Sisters of Charity. And the hospital's going to cost about $1 billion if it gets built. So, and this is, you know, that was 2016, and that was the plan. That was what Mulvey wrote in his final report, which was accepted by the government. The governors, by the way, of which I am one, had no knowledge of this letter, and neither did the board until it was presented to the board at the October meeting. Now, James Menton, chairman of St. Vincent's Hospital Group, on the 29th of May 2017, said that the move of the National Maternity Hospital to the site at Ellen Park will proceed only on the basis of existing agreements, that's the Mulvey Agreement, that give ownership and control of the new hospital to St. Vincent's Hospital Group, owned by the Sisters of Charity. So you can see how the whole thing was set up back in 2016, 2017. And it's hard to believe, but those are actual facts. Go to the next slide, please. Now, what's happened since then? The Sisters of Charity have transferred their shareholding to St. Vincent's Holdings, the holding company. In order to do that, they had to get permission from the Vatican, and that involved a petition or a letter or correspondence from the primate, the Catholic primate of all Ireland, the Archbishop of Dublin, and the Papal Nuncio. We've never seen what was in that petition to the Vatican. And the Vatican letter of permission stated that it was conditional, their transfer of their shareholding was conditional on the observance of particular canon laws. And not surprisingly, because that's the way it is all over the world. Now, the directors of St. Vincent's Holdings are committed to upholding the values and vision of Mother Mary Aikenhead, the founder of the Religious Sisters of Charity. And the core values of the sisters are retained in the Constitution of St. Vincent's Holdings. So we are being asked to believe that the core values of the Sisters of Charity, which have been retained, and the values of vision of Mother Mary Aikenhead, include the provision of services like abortion, termination of pregnancy, sterilization, IVF, contraception, etc., all directly contradictory to Catholic teaching and in direct opposition to the guidelines from the Catholic bishops of Ireland. That's a stretch to me. So the current position is that St. Vincent's Holdings owns St. Vincent's public, private hospitals and St. Michael's in Dunleary. There are 3 directors who own those 3 hospitals now, the holding company. There are Professor Michael Keane, who's a respiratory physician, Dr. David Brophy, who's a radiologist, and Sharon McCabe, who is a businesswoman. So that's the current sort of situation. Now, the transfer of the NMH has yet to take place. So next slide, please, Michael. Now, so what the proposal is, which has not yet been completed, is that the new NMH will be 100% owned by a Vatican-approved private company. There's a new company to be formed, the NMH DAC, Designated Activity Company. And the constitution of that qualifies the right of access to services by use of the phrase clinically appropriate. And we've seen the use of the word clinically appropriate in correspondence from the statements from the St. Vincent's Hospital, where they were saying that they had carried out sterilization procedures when it is clinically required to do so, but not for the exclusive purpose of sterilization. That was in October 2021. So that the constitution of the new hospital qualifies the right of access to services. The board structure, the proposed board structure, is unbalanced in favor of St. Vincent's Holdings. The proposal is that there would be 9 directors, 3 from St. Vincent's Holdings, 2 from Holles Street plus the master, and 3 ministerial nominees. Now, the 3 directors from St. Vincent's are committed to upholding the values and vision of Mother Mary Aikenhead, and the core values have been retained. The minister might appoint, we don't know who the minister is going to be in 20 years' time. We don't know, we probably don't know who it's going to be next year. But you can imagine the minister appointing, a conservative minister appointing conservative Catholic nominees to the board. And then you only need a conservative master or 1 conservative NMH, or indeed none. And you've got a 6-3 imbalance. And the way boards work, many of you will know, you will get capture, you get the Stockholm syndrome, and people don't want to disagree violently. And slowly you get a turnaround. And it's the board that appoints consultants to the hospital. So you can see the potential for problems. The St. Vincent's Holdings nominee will chair the board of the NMH for 3 out of every 9 years. The NMH nominee for another 3 years, and the ministerial nominee for another 3 years. Again, the chair of a board has a lot of influence on how board meetings run and how minutes are written, etc. So again, why on earth should somebody from St. Vincent's Healthcare Group chair the board of the National Maternity Hospital? It just is, from a corporate management and governance point of view, it's anathema to me. The master then is relegated to one of 4 clinical directors who reports to a group clinical director. The way it works on the outline of the clinical governance arrangement is that you have a surgical clinical director, medical clinical director, imaging clinical director, and obstetrical and gynecological clinical director. They all report to a group clinical director who reports to the CEO of the St. Vincent's Healthcare Group, who reports to the board of the St. Vincent's Holdings. So you can again see how the new maternity hospital is downgraded. And from my experience of doing many reviews around the country of adverse outcomes in maternity units, I can assure you it is a major error to integrate a maternity hospital or maternity services into a general hospital. It very quickly becomes the Cinderella of the service. And if anything is cut back in times of austerity, it's usually gynecological surgery. You can't cut back maternity because obviously when pregnant women turn up in labor, there's nothing you can do about that. So you can see how there are major problems. Now, what's likely to happen if it goes ahead in its current iteration is that the new maternity hospital, National Maternity Hospital, will pretty quickly be known as the maternity wing of St. Vincent's, because it'll be a subsidiary of St. Vincent's Healthcare Group. And you can see from the corporate and governance structures that there's trouble down the line. Next slide. So moving on to the more, if you like, international situation and what's happening. The Bon Secours Mercy Health, based in Cincinnati, comprises of 50 hospitals and 60,000 staff between the United States and Ireland. It's in the top 5 largest Catholic healthcare groups in the United States. And the top 10 Catholic healthcare systems control 1 in 6 beds in the United States and 394 acute care hospitals. They're the largest private healthcare provider in Ireland through the Bon Secours Group. As I referred to the 11 billion in global operating revenue, I referred to where they're located in the United States and in Ireland, and the numbers, the size of the operation. Next slide, please. Now, they merged the United States Bonds Mercy Healthcare System merged with the Irish Bonds, Bon Secours, and the CEO in July 29, in an interview published in Becker's magazine, said that the primary reason we did it is a concept of blood is thicker than water. These are cherished ministerial facilities in Ireland in the Bon Secours community. So we were compelled to do it for mission reasons, if nothing else. That's the Catholic mission, the mission of provision of Catholic healthcare. But the more we began to look at it, the more excited we got about the opportunities that it creates for both us here in the US and in Ireland. And then healthcare continues to evolve across the globe. Next slide. Now, in Ireland, about 57% of the population have private insurance through the VHI and so on. And the National Treatment Purchase Fund is increasingly being used as an outsource for deficiencies in the public health service in Ireland. And some of those, as you can see, when I gave you the figures earlier about the numbers of 66% of private hospitals in Ireland have a Catholic ethos. So the CEO of the Bon Secours in the States, again, made reference to integration with the Irish healthcare system and said that they were focused on quick wins to begin to extract efficiencies, share knowledge across the pond, and develop plans for the next 3 to 5 years. The bonds in Ireland are investing a huge amount of money in their own systems. And they're an integrated delivery system, so we will evaluate capital investments as one system. Next slide, please. And this is really interesting that they were able to learn a lot in the early days of the pandemic by working with our ministry in Ireland. And what has been unique is the way Ireland has public and private healthcare sectors. Private hospitals worked with the public healthcare sector on an agreement for private hospitals to take on public sector patients. As a result of the agreement, which expires at the end of June, Bon Secours Mercy Health was able to break even because we were compensated by Ireland's public government agency, the Health Service Executive. So in other words, the Irish state supported the entire Bon Secours Mercy Health, enabled them to break even. And remember, they have a turnover of 10 or 11 billion. And the HSE enabled them to break even. So that's the relationship that is evolving between the state and Catholic healthcare institutions. Now, why is this relevant to the Holles Street Vincent's thing? Well, in the constitution of St. Vincent's Holdings, it's very clearly stated that they can merge, acquire, buy, or sell themselves with any other healthcare organization. So you can imagine that if this whole thing goes through and the hospital is built within about 10 years, there'll be a merger with an American healthcare, Catholic healthcare organization, because that's what they're doing internationally on a global scale at the moment. And as we can see from this, because of the state offloading so much of public healthcare into the private sector, it's win-win. Next slide, please. So this is the last slide, and basically in reference to we will do everything legal in the state. Well, every procedure done in a Catholic hospital is legal, but they don't do every procedure that is legal. So every procedure that is legal is not done or not available. Again, you've got to parse what they say. Conscientious objection is a major issue. Only 9 out of the 19 maternity units provide a termination of pregnancy service now. Only 10% of GPs provide the service in the community. And conscientious objection is a major problem in Italy in the provision of abortion care. It's very difficult to get an abortion in Italy now. And of course, that's the Catholic Church influence. Constitutional rights come into play, again, with the Article 44 and the rights of religious organizations to set their own standards. And in the future, it clearly has implicated that the provision of Catholic healthcare and the control of healthcare by Catholic organizations has implications for female and male reproductive healthcare. That's very obvious. In the male side, it's sterilization operations, vasectomies. It will become important in assisted dying care when that becomes legal, as it's almost inevitably going to with changes in society in the future. And there are problems. At the moment, people think, oh, it's only to do with obstetrics and gynecology. It's not a problem in gastroenterology or psychiatry or orthopedics, for example, or cardiology. Well, gene editing is going to become an issue in the future with this technique called CRISPR, which is where genes can be altered. Now, at the moment, CRISPR is not often, but the potential for its use is where a couple have a genetic predisposition to their offspring having a very serious genetic condition, which may result in death or death early on in life after birth. But in order to treat or to avoid that situation, what happens now is that they have IVF, the embryo is tested, and if they've got several embryos, the embryos are tested, and only the ones without the gene abnormality are put back, and the others don't proceed. But the Catholic Church forbids IVF. So anybody attending a Catholic healthcare institution is denied access to the possibility of this, what is known as a pre-implantation diagnosis and reimplantation of healthy embryos. So you can see it's not just in reproductive healthcare, and gene editing then will become a thing, if you like, in cardiology and in other areas of medicine as more information becomes available around the genetic code and as treatments evolve. So I hope that I've covered enough and given you a flavor of the problems related to Catholic healthcare in Ireland, and obviously there's an American influence which is likely to grow with the passage of time. So thanks very much for listening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Peter. Hello, everybody. So thank you, Peter, for a wonderful presentation. Catherine, may I come to you, please? Perhaps there are some questions that have been shared on our chat functionality that you might like to read out, please.
Can you see me?
Everybody can see each other on a small screen.
Okay.
Peter, but if you're happy, I can bring it to just this functionality here so we can see you more clearly. There we go.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
The white of my eyes.
Excellent. So, Catherine,
there's a direct question there from Maeve. What can we, the Humanist Association, do to help? Well, lobby your TDs is an effective way, because they do actually read correspondence and they do pay attention to it. And if they get enough letters about a particular topic, they pay attention to it, and it does have an impact. Letters to the newspapers are also helpful.
We have another question there from Adam. Go ahead.
Yes. Well, first of all, I would just like to thank Dr. Boylan, you know, from the start on this. Obviously, you've been very, you know, vocal, and you know, that was very necessary. And then the same, obviously, with the repeal of the 8th Amendment. I think, you know, you played a central role in that campaign. And again, I think, you know, we're all very appreciative, you know, to you for that. I suppose I would just have a question and then just a brief comment. My question would kind of concern the, you know, the way that there's kind of, is it 9 or 10 of the hospitals in Ireland are currently not providing abortion services. Would you kind of link that directly to the Catholic ethos? You know, because I know people are talking about kind of, there's this review of the legislation coming up, or it's in train at the moment. But I think it's quite alarming that the existing law that was endorsed by the Irish people, that's still not being given full effect to, as you know, as we speak here. So that would just be my question. Is that just kind of, you know, inertia in the system as we're all used to in Ireland, or is it kind of more sinister than that? And then just my comment, I would just say very briefly, would be that I'd be wearing my NXF hat as well, the National LGBT Federation, and we gave a presentation. At the moment, we're doing political briefings with all the main political parties, just in terms of what our issues are for the coming Oireachtas term. And we presented to Fianna Fáil yesterday evening, and the education issue came up because that's very important to our community. But I think it's kind of relevant in the context of healthcare too. You know, we heard from people, you know, at that meeting who spoke about how teachers, there's still a huge chill effect. You know, that over 4 out of 5 teachers in our publicly funded schools are not out, LGBT plus teachers, and all are, there isn't actually a secular teaching college in Ireland. It's entirely delivered by our teachers, are trained in effect by the Catholic Church. And everyone is encouraged to this day. There's still, teachers still have to almost pretend that they go to mass every week. You know, it was like, to be honest, it was like listening to something out of the 1950s. So we kind of pat ourselves in the back that we're this great liberal country, and, you know, public opinion has moved on. But so many of our institutions are still they're captive, really. They've been held captive by religious interests. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, education is a real problem. With regard to the hospitals, it's the religious ethos, the Catholic ethos of the people working in the hospitals. A lot of the nursing staff would have problems, for example, with the provision of abortion services, and some of them indeed with other things like sterilization operations. It's also partly inertia, because it's much easier for the doctors working in those hospitals to say, oh, well, we can't do it here because either we don't have the facilities, our infrastructure isn't good enough, or you know, we're not able to do it because of conscientious objections. There's too many people. And you'll sometimes get, maybe in smaller units around the country, there may only be, say, 3 consultants. And if you've got 2 of them who are conscientious objectors, well, then it's extremely difficult for the remaining consultant to provide a service, particularly with the pressure from the other 2, and also perhaps from other people in the hospital. And sometimes it's the managers. I think with the passage of time, as younger consultants are appointed, and as more women consultants, female consultants are appointed, that will change. And there has been a big feminization of medicine in general, but particularly in obstetrics. And I was talking to a woman recently who had a cesarean section, and she said there were about 15 people in the operating theatre, but there were no men. So everybody was a woman, and that's the way it's moving. And I think with the passage of time, that's what will happen. Also, when it's a termination for a fatal fetal abnormality, those women will always be sent to one of the major centres, Dublin, Cork, or Galway, because they don't have the experience in the more peripheral hospitals. And also the diagnosis is usually confirmed. It may be suspected in a peripheral hospital, but it's confirmed in one of the major teaching hospitals. And even if the doctors in the teaching hospital try and refer the woman back to her or original hospital, quite often either the woman herself or the doctors there will say, "Oh, well, actually, no, we'd prefer if you looked after her because, she, for whatever reason." And then at the other end of the scale, for the very early terminations, the vast majority of those are done in GP practices. So the remaining terminations are for either severe maternal illness, and quite often those are in fact transferred to the major centres. And also there wouldn't be that many of them. And then the emergencies are few and far between. I mean, the real emergencies where a woman's dying in front of you. So, it's a whole combination of different things, but I think with the passage of time, that things will get a bit better.
Thanks for the question, Adam. Peter, you have a question as well? Go ahead.
Thank you very much. There's a lot of information there, Peter, that I didn't know before, but I knew I'd seen the ethical rules of the St. Vincent's when Atheist Ireland got it a few weeks ago. But there was enough suspicious stuff in the constitution of St. Vincent's Healthcare Group and St. Vincent's Holdings to tell you that that was the case anyway. But at the time when the government did the last thing in public months ago, when they settled that they were going to do this deal, and you say it's not totally finished, which I'm glad to hear. At the time, I actually sent some emails to quite a few TDs, and in particular the Minister for Health and the Taoiseach. And the replies were a waste of 3 screen pages of text about what the government is doing and how great it is, but they didn't address the question at all. So, and secondly, in other words, it's hard to get at the TDs. And secondly, then in private, ordinary conversations, I've met some people who I kind of think have sense and wouldn't really want the sort of thing that you've explained is likely to happen. But they decide that they're accepting the deal as is, the government has made it and we have to put up with it. Now, I myself have always felt throughout my life that people who do that are simply not trying hard enough to achieve what we, the people, it might be an individual thing, but it might be this is for the whole people, not trying hard enough to do what's really needed. So I suppose I'm not asking you for a lot over what to do next, and I appreciate your communication to TDs, and I suppose the pandemic actually had a bad effect on personal visits to TDs. I think I'll make a few personal visits. But it depends. Yes. You see, my experience of that before and other matters, which are largely about secular state, are I don't think TDs pay attention to one person. And I don't know how many people are going to go to TDs.
Yeah, it's interesting. It hasn't been completed yet. And I have suggested, and so has Chris Fitzpatrick, former master of the Coombe Hospital, that what they should really spend the money on, instead of spending $1 billion on a maternity hospital in South County Dublin, where not that many people are having babies because of the age structure and difficulty in buying a house for young couples and so on, that we're all familiar with, that a much better solution would be to, and cheaper would be to build a specialist unit in St. James's Hospital on the site beside the National Children's Hospital, where women who are going to be delivered of a baby who will need immediate surgery or treatment can be transferred directly across a corridor bridge into the National Children's Hospital, instead of being put in an ambulance and transferred from God knows where, maybe across the country. And also women who have really complicated pregnancies, and that's happening increasingly because a lot of people who would formerly have died have been rescued, if you like, by improvements in pediatric surgery, like, for example, complicated cardiac surgery and so on. And these can be extremely complicated pregnancies, and they may need the input of a whole load of people. They may need to be delivered prematurely, so it makes sense to have them. So a small unit, maybe 20 or 30 beds or something like that on that site. And then in the meantime, I'm not sure many people know this, but there's been huge investment in Hollow Street. They have new operating theatres, they have new delivery suites, single rooms, they have a new neonatal intensive care unit, they have a new fetal treatment centre. They're the only maternity hospital in the country, maternity unit, that got its own MRI scan on foot of a generous private donation. The new emergency room, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I mean, the absolute ideal would be a new maternity hospital, but given the constraints on the general health service, where what we need are hospitals to deal with the ridiculous waiting lists and you know, hospitals for elective treatment only, it would be a much better investment of the state's money for the overall population, and concentrate the really complicated pregnancies and the ones where the babies need immediate treatment on the site of a general hospital, St. James's, which has got all the specialties and access to the pediatric hospital. And it wouldn't be that hard to staff it with existing consultants from the 3 Dublin maternity hospitals.
Thank you, Peter. David, can I ask you to unmute, please? Honorary President David McConnell. Hello, good evening.
Hi, David.
Hello, Peter. Thank you very much for just a truly wonderful and also really alarming talk. I mean, it's worse, I think, than many of us thought. This is just not just a matter of the future of the National Maternity Hospital. It's a future, actually, of Irish medicine. This is what we're seeing in the Bon Secours situation, is that a very substantial fraction of the Irish hospital system is being taken over by a particularly conservative and American and vast organization.
Yep.
And the clear implication is that they can extend this reach. There's nothing, as you have pointed out, to stop the St. Vincent Hospital holdings essentially to transfer their assets to our organization in the United States. So we're looking at more than half of the Irish hospital system being transferred to American organizations, conservative Catholic organizations. This is a risk, right? And that is a very, very, very serious risk. There's no question about it. So the first thing I'd like to ask you to do is to, maybe you have, and maybe I've missed it, but I think an article pointing out that this is a real prospect, that it is already with us, that the largest private provider of medical care in the country is now controlled from the United States. So what I'd plead with you, I would hope that you would write this up and that it would be a very significant op-ed in not one, but maybe several papers. It's a really horrifying prospect. The second thing, may I just, you and I remember that the whole situation was changed by a case, the McGee case, all those years ago, when a very, very courageous woman living in a caravan in Skerries was advised by her doctor that if she were to have another child, this would seriously threaten her health and therefore, of course, the whole welfare of her family. And that went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided that contraception, in fact, had to become legal in Ireland. I suspect Mrs. McGee is still alive, and we owe her a very, very great debt of gratitude. It seems to me, though, that the hospitals, I think you actually said that they were abiding by the law, but it doesn't seem to me that they are clearly and unambiguously abiding by the law, because they are simply not providing those services which are legally available in the country. So it does seem to me that there is a clear opportunity for a case to be taken against a particular hospital by a particular patient and her doctors, that she is not being provided with the care to which she is entitled under Irish law. And I would expect that to go through the courts to end up in the Supreme Court, and I would expect the Supreme Court to decide in favor of that patient. So I really think that we have got to think, I mean, for so many years, it has been, I must not go on, but we all know that the Oireachtas has been dragged by the courts to abide by Irish law, laws which they themselves in the Oireachtas had over decades, they had actually enacted, but they didn't put them into effect. And the courts brought them over and over again, put their feet to the fire and said, get on with it. We've now got to do the same again. So I would hope that with a little bit of care, we can actually force these hospitals to provide the services which are legally available in the state. But once again, Peter, thank you very, very much. You're one of the most courageous and important figures in Irish social progress of the last 20 years. So thank you for a wonderful talk. And please don't let it just be, I'm sure you won't, that's not your nature, but there's 45 or 50 people listening to you this evening. This is much more important. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. You've given me my homework now to write an op-ed. We'll see where that goes. Yeah, no, I agree with you entirely. And I mean, the reason I think that they pushed through the agreement with St. Vincent's Holdings and the NMH recently is because there was so much political capital invested in it, and they didn't want to lose face by admitting that they got it wrong. And it all went back to Simon Harris when he was Minister for Health, and in many ways he was a very good minister. But you know, within hours of virtually of being appointed Minister for Health, he said, "I'm going to use my newness as a minister to get this thing sorted out." And in his naivety, I think he welcomed the Mulvey report, giving ownership of the hospital, of a maternity hospital, for God's sake. Well, not for God's sake, for whoever's sake. Shouldn't say that to a humanist group. To a religious order which has, you know, such a sullied reputation, unfortunately, because they did do a lot of good over the years. But unfortunately, you know, it was, I thought it was just crazy. I couldn't believe it. And that's, anyway, that's what started the whole thing. But yeah, I mean, the problem is forcing a hospital or doctors to do something to which they have a conscientious objection is really difficult. What the state could do is ensure that they appoint people to a hospital who are willing to provide all services that are legal. Now, the doctors in Hollis say that they, of course, won't have any inhibitions or any restrictions on what they do, but they're not for the National Maternity Hospital anymore. They're going to be working for St. Vincent's Healthcare Group.
And they'll have to sign that commitment to ethics.
Yeah, I mean, the current consultants say they don't sign any commitment, but I don't know. I mean, it's very, you know, credibility is an issue, can I put it that way, with a lot of the stuff that comes out surrounding this whole thing. And there are things that are said that are then denied, and you know, as I said, you have to parse everything. And they say they do sterilizations, but then a hysterectomy is a sterilizing operation, and so on. You know, they say they've done terminations, and they do deliver some women in St. Vincent's who've got a particularly complicated form of placenta previa. And every woman who is delivered of a baby has her pregnancy terminated. It ends like the terminus in a bus route.
That's the law of second effect or something. Isn't there some sophistry that allows you to do something which has two effects, one of which is good, and that's the primary one, and the other one, which is bad, is unintended consequence.
Yeah, and the Catholic Church find it's acceptable in Catholic teaching to do a hysterectomy for a cancer which will kill a woman, even though she's pregnant. So she might be, say, 10 weeks or 6 weeks pregnant, is having a cancer operation, the side effect of which is that the embryo will be removed in the uterus, but the direct intention is not the ending of the life of the embryo. So that's acceptable, that sort of thing. But again, you know, it's dancing on the head of a pin sort of stuff.
Well, perhaps the crisis in the healthcare system will postpone, which I think was one of the implications of some of your comments, would actually postpone the decision to go ahead with the National Maternity Hospital on the St. Vincent's campus, and allow it to be decided to send it somewhere else where there will be no question of ethical inhibition. There are other hospitals in the city, as we know, where the same ethical controls are not in place.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that they haven't sent it out to tender yet. And when a tender comes back, it's not going to be cheap. And, you know, even getting a builder to agree now to the, you know, the constraints that they have in state contracts on inflationary pressures and so on in building, I think they're probably just hoping to long finger it and leave it to the next government, as they often do. So,
but in the meantime, there is this really pressing problem that a very substantial number of hospitals in the country are simply not providing services which are legally available, legally permissible in the state. And that is absolutely intolerable. And somehow this has to be addressed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember, well, many years ago now, it must be, it must be at least 20 years ago now, I had a patient who had a miscarriage, and it was a non-continuing pregnancy. There was no fetal heartbeat, and it was absolutely confirmed on scan and so on. Because of who she was, I admitted her to Blackrock Clinic for a D&C. And there was a lot of muttering went on, and I was very clearly told not to do it again. I put her down for a D&C, but when they discovered that it was a miscarriage, there was, it was almost at the stage of waking her up and sending her into Holles Street to have the procedure done.
So, by the way, that is one thing which is not generally recognized, that so many of the private hospitals are actually committed to Catholic medical ethics.
Yeah, 66%.
Absolutely, you know, not recognized.
And I haven't worked out the number of beds in those hospitals. So and I think a lot of the smaller private places which are not influenced by Catholic ethos may not have that many beds. So I need to do a calculation on the number of beds. Vincent's and the Mat are private between about 450 beds. So,
Catherine, this shouldn't end up as a conversation between Peter and myself. So thank you very much, Peter, for answering those questions.
you're welcome.
Thanks, David. We have another question there from Catherine. Catherine with a C. Are you still looking for a question?
She's muted.
Yeah, I'm asking her to unmute.
Sorry.
There we go.
I just want to thank you for all the articles you've had in the paper and the letters and things like that. You seem to be the only person putting your head above the parapet on this matter. I don't know if there are other medics doing it, but yours is the only name that I know. I have written to TDs before, but I'm certainly going to write to every single one of them now. At the end of the day, the Catholic Church has no respect for women. That's why they're able to do these sort of things. And my daughter will squirm if she ever hears that. No, I have told her before that any religions where old men in dresses are in charge, they do not like women and children. And it is quite true if you think about it. But no, I will be writing to everybody because you've actually told me, you know, it needs to be done. And I cannot believe the messing around that's been going on. If it was something to do with men, it would have been done years and years and years ago. And there wouldn't have been all this, oh, what it's allowed or what isn't allowed. And it's just trying to control people's fertility for one thing at the end of the day. And anyway, thank you for what you've done so far and what we hope you'll still be doing.
Thank you. It all goes back to Eve.
It does, yeah. Actually, I have to tell you, I had a sterilization in 1983 and I had to go down to Bandon Nursing Home to have it done, because you couldn't get it done well, the doctor who I went to said that was the best place to go. So I went down and I had it. And the smell of boiled cabbage will follow me forever because that's what seemed to smell in that hospital. Anyway, I managed to get it done. So that was the main thing. So thank you for what you've done for women.
Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. I think another question. Peter, you want to pop back in there? Yeah, go ahead.
I've thought of something else which I thought while you were speaking, Peter, but in many cases the thing about which I've thought many times. Well, I went to medical school in 1971 and finished in 1977. I was at a secondary school before that, but I remember when I went to college and lived in Dublin, I noted the annual statements in the paper of the millions given to the hospitals that were not part of any health board. And I think at that time, the largest hospitals in Dublin, say St. James's and the Mater, maybe got 10 million a year. Now it's more like 50 times that, as you've told us. But I thought then, why is the state paying money to what is, well, St. James's is not, but religious organizations for which the state cannot control? And the biggest things, I suppose, are the developments in those hospitals, the building of new extra buildings and so on, which has cost us, the people, a lot. Now, I've thought a bit about the article you mentioned, the 5th part of Article 44 of the Constitution. Every religious denomination shall have the right to manage its own affairs, own, acquire, and administer property, movable and immovable, and maintain institutions for religious or charitable purposes. Now, ever since I've paid attention to this, which is at least 10 years, I've thought to run a hospital is not a religious purpose. In other words, of course, the Catholic Church, there's a court case where the state seeks to take over the building of a hospital for which the state has paid 90-something% of the cost by now. The church is going to complain, and they're likely to argue that to run a hospital is a religious purpose. But I think it's time, I think Ireland has become more secular. It's possible a few judges could decide that to run a hospital is a healthcare purpose. And the largest argument in favor is that wherever this hospital is, it's not the hospital for the Catholic people of that area. It's the hospital for the people of that area, and the number of them who are Catholic is reducing. And even some of those who are Catholic don't automatically want not to use contraception. When contraception got the public attention after Mrs. McGee, clearly most of the people getting contraception, women on the pill, were Catholics, but they decided to get it. So I still wonder whether there's scope there, but it does depend on a Supreme Court deciding to treat religion as religion and health services as secular.
Yeah, I couldn't understand why the state didn't stand up to St. Vincent's, because it was Vincent's who were blocking the whole thing all along unless they got total control. But then you had this utter capitulation with the statement that they're happy for the charity to own the hospital. And I just felt, look, the state's paying for this, so the state should set the conditions, and that it would be clearly state-owned on state land, and clearly secular. I think overall it's for historical reasons that we found ourselves in this position, because of the state effectively handing over, or not handing over, the church taking over religion and healthcare in the early years. I think overall, though, a lot of people in the voluntary hospital system are very reluctant to engage with the state in terms of governance and ownership, because the state doesn't have a great record, let's be fair. I think that generally speaking, the governance model of the voluntary hospitals is a good one, where you've got a board with the required expertise and plenty of medical input. A small board, the Rotunda is a great example. It's got a small board with the right expertise and the right amount of turnover. That to whom the chief executive reports. And unfortunately, the chief managers of the hospitals in the HSE don't actually, they're very well intentioned, they're very hardworking and all of them very nice people and so on, but they cannot understand the business that they're running, that they're managing, because they're not walking the floor, which the doctors are. And that's why you need the governance model of the voluntary hospitals, but paid for, not the governance, the director's not paid, but the hospital paid for and effectively controlled, if you like, by the state. And so that everything that is legal in the state will be done in those hospitals, and you don't have this situation. Unless they want to be completely private and have no state input at all, that's fine, off you go and do that. And nobody should stop anybody from doing that in a democracy. But don't expect the state to pay for it, would be my argument.
Thank you, Peter. If you may, we have one question that has come onto our question and answer section from Judith Ashton. Why are so many doctors hesitant to speak up around the end of life terminations? Is it fear, pressure, or being censored? Many eminent doctors seem to be unable to express those opinions And would you have any commentary around that, please?
Well, I think most of them, unless they're involved in obstetrics and gynecology, it doesn't really affect them on a day-to-day basis. For many obstetricians and gynecologists, it doesn't affect them on a day-to-day basis. So, and a lot of them think, oh, that's a political problem, I'm not going to get involved. I'm busy enough, I'm on call too much, my working conditions are terrible, I hate the government, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all sorts of reasons. And, you know, it's much easier not to get involved. It's much easier. Life is a lot easier. You can go and play golf or go sailing or do whatever you want to do in your free time. And yeah, I think that's it. Chris Fitzpatrick is somebody who has spoken up and has written to the papers. He's former master of the Coombe Hospital. And, you know, I think a lot of doctors, and particularly the younger ones, and particularly among the female younger ones, do support what I'm saying. And I'll often meet colleagues, even from Holles Street, who'll say, yeah, you're absolutely right. And you say, well, why don't you say something? You know, yeah, I've got to work there, and, you know, etc. You know. Yeah,
we had this in some ways with Dr. Kate Stapleton in a talk where similarly she's looking at you know, non-religious acceptance for teachers in the professions. So it's a constant theme. It runs through many facets of our society. So, but yeah, it's great to see you are here to show that there is a way to stand up. Maeve, I believe, Catherine, there's one, perhaps, and we may take this as our final question, if that's okay with you, Peter.
Yep. Go ahead, Maeve.
Okay, turn my camera on so it's less impersonal. Peter, thanks a million for your presentation. It's a massive education for me. I've been out of Ireland for a long time, and quite frankly, I'm sitting here thinking, whatever powers may be, that most of my maternity experiences were in Germany because it's pretty scary what you're describing. I'm also noticing that in terms of demographic, I think most people are like me and are just grateful at this stage. Things are not dropping off. And it makes me wonder, what is your sense of among the younger population, how much people care about this? I mean, you mentioned female doctors. I would have thought that the younger, especially female population, should be absolutely up in arms about this. And if not, why not? And what potentially could we do to make them care more?
I think a lot of younger people don't know what the situation is, and that's very similar in the United States, where Catholic healthcare organizations have taken over hospitals which have not originally been Catholic, but then have imposed their Catholic ethos on them, and women turn up not realizing that they're entering into a Catholic ethos hospital during a complicated pregnancy. So I think young people, a lot of them just don't know. It doesn't impact their life until they enter, you know, possibility of reproduction and contraception and stuff. And it's not that difficult to get contraception now in Ireland. So it really only becomes an issue once you get into perhaps having children yourself, and then getting them into a school, and then you suddenly realize what the position is right across Irish society. And then, of course, if you're not impacted by it, supposing you've got a, you know, totally uncomplicated pregnancy, you get very good care. It doesn't really matter where you go. Generally, you've got to be careful of that. Generally speaking, you'll get very good care. And it's only once you run into, you know, say, look, I'd like to have screening done for an abnormality. And you then might run into something, or if an abnormality is found, and then you might run into a problem, or if you've had your children say, I'd like to be sterilized now, and then you face up to it. So unless it impacts people directly, they tend not to be particularly engaged with a particular troublesome topic. I think that's really why. And for a lot of my colleagues, they're not actually directly engaged. You know, so yeah, I mean, it's a question of I guess raising awareness, and David and others have made reference to the Supreme Court And certainly in Ireland and in other democracies, it seems that the way to get legislation through on difficult social issues is to take it through the courts. And then that forces the politicians who don't really want to engage with controversial topics into doing things. And then the Citizens' Assembly was fantastic because that reflected the feeling among society, what people's opinions generally in society were. And that led on then to repeal and to the legislation. And I suspect the same thing will have to happen with assisted dying legislation in a few years' time, because that debate is only just kind of beginning. So yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. And like so many things, like Savita, it takes a crisis or a massive controversy to move things forward. But the legislation on abortion is such now that it's kind of quiet, and you only get the occasional thing popping up, like baby Christopher, who had an error in diagnosis and the pregnancy was terminated, and he turned out to be a perfectly normal baby, but they didn't follow through on basically what they should have done. So, it's generally speaking, it's not a topic that people want to engage with. But I think the broader question of Catholic involvement in healthcare and the expanding influence, particularly on the private side, and the state funding of the public voluntary hospitals, is certainly something that could get traction. So I'll write that op-ed.
Thank you, Maeve. I mean, and Peter, if I may comment, one word that sticks out to me was education. If we look particularly on the flip side to the healthcare system, the research area across the country, and I personally am involved in medical supply chain, and when I see Luke O'Neill and Nibert, Conway, all the work connected to the various companies and research that is done here, we know that we can see ways to improve the country. So education, with everything you're talking about, would seem to align with that as well. And perhaps a final word, Peter, if you may, from yourself, to close out our evening.
Well, thank you very much for listening. The questions were great, and certainly I was glad of the stimulation that they provided to answer some of the issues that we covered. Very grateful to David for giving me some homework to do. It's keep me occupied now for a little bit of time in the future, in the next couple of weeks. And keep up the work of the Irish Humanist Association, because it's great. And I think that, society changes with the passage of time, and I'm heartened by the attitude of a lot of the younger trainees coming through. And I think that as time goes on, things will change again a bit for the better. But the overall thing of the state funding so much Catholic constricted healthcare is troubling, to say the least, and needs a debate and needs action. But that's I think is going to take time. But thank you again for listening.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for everybody for joining this evening. Really wonderful questions and engagement. To keep abreast of next talks that we will have, you'll find them on our socials, on our humanism.ie website. We will be writing a summary of our talk this evening, and with Peter's permission, we will be sharing the recording as well on our socials. So on behalf of everybody at Humanism Ireland and everybody here this evening, thank you for your time, and have a wonderful rest of evening. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Bye.